Hello, folks.
Hi, everybody. Just before we came on, the dude saying, "Come on, quickly. Sharon's going in an hour's, just over an hour's time." Just before we came. Is that right?
I'm sorry. I had to mute my YouTube real quick. Sorry, folks. I'm still a rookie. 4.5 years in, and I'm still a rookie forgetting to mute YouTube. Anyway,
same here. This is their comedy half hour. This is
but it's good to be here with good friends in the chat. So
yeah, this is all they tune in for. It's just for the banter. So no, we were trying to sort out some technical issues with trying to share my version of "Come With Me" that I have been working on tirelessly now for several months.
With me now, down to Manitou. Walk with me now.
You like that one, don't you?
Hey, well, it came to me. One day I was listening to it on the radio. It's weird how it happens. It's really weird how it happens. But sometimes you're just sitting there listening to a song. You have a topic on your mind, and you're thinking, and for whatever reason, the song's in your head, and you're thinking about what you're thinking about, and suddenly little rhymes occur to you while you're kind of contemplating both, and it's just weird. You just think of little correlations of where you can make rhymes and try to tell a story that makes sense, and it came together for this song. Like for the entire song, it all came together on this one. Usually I run into trouble on a parody because I get to parts of the song where I don't know how to tie in, but with this one I was just able to come up with lyrics that kind of went along with the spirit of the song, and so it was a lot of fun. So I'm excited. I'm glad you're getting that over to me, and we can get it timed out and make sure that it's all set. And then you can go ahead and put you actually playing the accordion on it, maybe a little bit more bass in there, and then I think it'll be good to go.
You could. The reason you can't hear the bass is because it was just through the little speaker on the.
Sure.
On the trust me, when you hear the actual file, there's plenty bass and plenty drums.
Oh,
it's just you don't hear that coming through quite as prominently. Just on put your headphones on and it'll be fine.
Yeah. So I'll get that from him after this. He'll get that sent over, and that ought to be fun. But after this, you guys all got to pay attention because Sharon's going to be having an interesting chat with a guy named Captain Borax over on her channel. They're going to be talking Ted Bundy. So those of you who have an interest in that kind of stuff, profiling and, serial killer kind of thing, go check that out. So,
well, of course, there's a connection, isn't there, with odontology, the fascinating science of.
I do agree that I do agree with the odontologist that in the Ted Bundy case that it was pretty convincing, mainly because you had both sides of Bundy's jaw usually, whereas a lot of times, like when you're watching the Innocence Files, you're watching that one guy, what's his name, Mike West, right?
Yeah,
Mike West.
Yeah, Mike.
And you're watching him, and he's like matching up a top set of an impression, right, on a wound. But there's like no bottom part for where he would have been squeezing the flesh between his teeth. So there's like no bottom marks where his bottom teeth broke, right? But with Bundy, you have pretty much, you have both, you know what I mean? You have both. So that's what I think makes the bite mark evidence convincing with Bundy and not convincing in the cases that the Innocence Files presented. So.
Well, I think even then, even in the Bundy case, I think that there back then there was this idea, this notion that somehow that was proper science, but it has been completely debunked.
The science
completely debunked.
I think it doesn't enjoy the kind of like avant-garde, kind of like like when it was brought into court before, it was like highly convincing. I believe it's fallen from grace. I believe it's not as convincing as it used to be, but I think it still gets used. And maybe sometimes juries are moved by it if there's some other evidence besides it possibly to help support. You know what I mean? But I would agree, bite mark evidence isn't going to be good to be like hanging your whole case on nowadays. Not going to be a good idea to do that.
The thing is that if you're biting into flesh is a obviously basically a soft surface, so you're not going to get a true impression. If you were biting into, say, I don't know, some sort of clay or something,
Right.
fine. You could then come out and you could say that definitely, you can see by the size of the teeth, but just by the marks they leave. To say that, as somebody said, all you can do with bite marks is exclude somebody with a smaller mouth or a bigger mouth.
Sure. Oh, well, that's the guy that Mike West looked up to. That he was the guy that did the Ted Bundy case. And the Ted Bundy guy, that guy was saying the same thing. He's like, nowadays I say, what you said. He's like, nowadays I say that we can't exclude, or whatever. He's like, we use that terminology now. Yeah. And so, that guy was all too willing to go with the flow of, okay, well, yeah, it's being called into, question and as being a suspect, science or whatever. He kind of rolled with that and tried to salvage, as best he could. He's like, well, okay then, but it still may be valid if it can help with other evidence and, type of thing. I mean, he was obviously rolling with the punches, but he understood the concerns that were being raised. And I admired that about that guy, that unlike Mike West, whose answer was to go smoke another cigarette and pound a Miller High Life. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's that. I was impressed by that guy, less so by Mike.
I must admit, I tend to go with just one of the guys in the Innocence Files. There's a guy called, great surname, Chris Fabricant. and he was the one that in that meeting with the Ted Bundy expert and other people, he said, look, it is junk science. You cannot, because the problem is how can you say that those teeth marks were produced by one person and one person only? Right. What indeed and beyond doubt that it's that person. Of all the people on this planet, those teeth, those bite marks left on that fleshy surface belongs to that person. That is utter nonsense. That is balderdash. That is, I could.
I agree. Because I get what you're saying. Because, like you're saying, if it was clay or something that didn't have any ability to kind of bounce back after being, pierced or whatever. So, with flesh, obviously, flesh has some ability to kind of bounce back after being compressed. So it's not going to be a perfect, likeness to the teeth and the whatever, right? I get it. I get that it's suspect. I don't deny any of those things. I agree 100% that this evidence should not be used solely on its own to convict anybody. I agree with that. Might it still be useful in conjunction with other evidence to help a case that maybe whatever? Then maybe it can be used then. But then it has to be used with the terminology we were just discussing, which is, can't be excluded, which is a lot less definitive than the to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, which is a lot more definitive, right? So I mean, there's those differences that have occurred, and so I mean, since bite mark evidence has been exposed to be somewhat suspect.
Somewhat, I would say completely. But anyway, the point is that where it does get a little bit of credibility is the fact that, on the other hand, odontologists, they look at, for example, victims of an air crash, and then they can use, basically that they can determine who the victim was by their teeth. You've actually got the teeth there. The science says that you can look at those teeth, you compare it with dental records, and you can identify that person who was the victim. But you can't go identifying suspects to teeth marks.
I agree that it's not an exact science, and I mean.
I'm with Chris Fabricant, and he's got a great surname as well. So I'm with Chris.
Like I said, I think it has issues, and I don't think it should be used solely as the sole piece of major evidence to convict anybody, because it's far too suspect. I agree with all those things. I believe it may still have purpose in some cases. Anyways,
as Robert Herman would say, for purely entertainment value.
I guess so. Since we're on your channel and you get to spin everything that go ahead, buddy. Have it your own way.
Are we on my channel? I thought we were on your channel.
Getting hard to tell.
I know. So anyway, on to the main business. And hopefully everything will work okay, like it did a few minutes ago.
Oh, hey, look, Travis is here. What's up, dude?
Yeah, nice to see Travis here.
Some of those bozos got people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree. And Mike West, I believe, was not as not as like wonderful as he likes to think he is.
Yeah.
Particularly when I see that guy and how much he loves to talk about how much he loves to drink and go down to the local bar, and it's like he almost wanted to spend more of the documentary talking about that than he did about bite marks. I don't know. Anyway.
Exactly. Okay, here we go then. This is the article, the first article we'll look at very, very briefly, and then we'll move on to the main one, and then come back to this one later on. Hope everybody's got that. Would you like to take it away, dude? Be my guest.
For me to read now? Okay.
Yes.
Expert witness goes nuts during questioning for Mississippi death penalty case by Radley Baldo.
Yep.
I've been reporting on this crazy death investigation system in Mississippi for about 10 years now. Just when I thought things couldn't get more surreal, I'm inevitably proven wrong. The latest example comes in a deposition last April of the disgraced bite mark expert Michael West. To fully appreciate what happened during and after this deposition, you need quite a bit of background. If you have 20 minutes or so, this piece I wrote for Huffington Post a few years ago is pretty thorough.
Okay, so here we go. Here is the article that he wrote, because it's going to make a lot more sense to come back to because it's a brilliant article, this later one that Radley wrote, but this is the bit that he's referring to, and it is worth having a look through and seeing exactly what he wrote, and it was an extensive.
Okay, so we have the solving Kathy Mabry's murder. Brutal. Can you scroll?
Hi.
Getting a little premature there, dude. Okay.
I did. Hold on a sec. Where's my mouse gone off wonky?
Uh-oh.
Hold on a sec. Let's go back to this one. Let's come back to that one. I don't know what I've done.
Sharon's over there complaining. She likes it better when you read it.
Oh, well, yes. Yeah. I don't know what's happened there. Oh, there we go. Oh, no.
Okay,
no.
So brutal 15-year-old crime highlights decades-long Mississippi scandal. Let's see here. J.D. Bubba Roseman, the first black sheriff of Humphreys County, is a convivial man in his office and in casual conversations on the street in his town of 2,200 people. He engages people quickly and easily, inquiring about a son on the football team, a niece in college, or a grandmother in the hospital. He talks loud and fast, always smiling, and works a deep, infectious laugh into just about every conversation. But when Roseman, 57, talks about Kathy Mabry, the mirth drains from his face. His brow straightens. He speaks softly. He pauses from time to time to swallow the catch that latches into his words, and his eyes sometimes well up. It's an unexpected thing from a stout man wearing a gun. Mabry was murdered here in 1997 at the age of 39. This part of America once produced murder ballads that brutal crimes like this one, blues greats like Pinetop Perkins, Elmore James, and Sonny Boy Williamson have all called Humphreys County home.
So, sorry, I was moving at the time. This part of America once produced murder ballads about brutal crimes.
About brutal crimes.
So, in other words, people used to sing about the crimes coming there, you know?
Right. Kathy Mabry's killer raped her, then slashed her face, head, and throat with a rusty razor blade. She was left to bleed to death on the floor of a vacant house. I think about the case every day, Roseman says. I told Kathy's mama I wouldn't get an honest night's rest until we got the man who did this. Roseman was the Belzoni police chief back then, the first black man elected to that position as well. His election to both positions shows how much the region has changed over the past half century in what may have been the first assassination of the civil rights era. The Reverend George Lee was murdered here in 1955 while registering blacks to vote. In those years, white citizen councils beat civil rights volunteers with such frequency that the town earned the nickname Bloody Belzoni.
Shall I see if I can just enlarge it slightly with just see if I can zoom in a bit?
Control plus, or that,
yeah,
or that.
Is that a bit better for you?
Sure.
Yeah, that's better, isn't it? where are we up to? We finished that.
You need to scroll down. I just read the part that
bloody Belzoni.
Right. Today, Humphrey's population, about 9,000, is the seventh poorest county in America's poorest state. The poverty rate here approaches 40%, but it's also a close-knit community where families go back several generations or more. Violent crime is rare. The county saw all of one murder in 2012. It doesn't happen that often here, Roseman says. Mabry's murder stunned people here, in part because it was so unexpected, but also because it was so unspeakably vicious. She came from a quiet, respected family, Roseman says. They were well-liked. Most folks around here hadn't ever experienced that kind of a murder. So it shook the town. It's still shaking the town. The case went unsolved for 15 years until December, after a casual courtroom conversation led lawyers from the Mississippi Innocence Project to investigate it. That two attorneys for an organization better known for getting the wrongly convicted out of prison would take it upon themselves to solve a cold case is remarkable enough. Their search covered the state from Columbus in the northeast to Oxford in the northwest, to the crime lab in Jackson, to a dusty attic in the Humphreys County Courthouse, deep in the belly of the Delta. The reason they felt compelled to act is part of a larger scandal currently unfolding in Mississippi. The original police investigation into Mabry's murder hinged on the forensic analysis of Stephen Hayne, a longtime Mississippi medical examiner, and Michael West, a dentist and self-proclaimed bite mark expert. Hayne was a doctor in private practice who, at the time, performed nearly all of the state's autopsies. West was one of his frequent collaborators. The two men have been at the heart of the Mississippi death investigation system for 2 decades. West has testified in dozens of cases, Hayne in thousands, including a number of death penalty cases. Media investigations over the years, however, including my own for the Huffington Post and Reason Magazine, have revealed that both Hayne and West have contributed critical evidence that led to the convictions of people who were later exonerated and routinely and flagrantly flouted the ethical and professional standards of their respective fields. West, for example, once claimed he could match the bite marks in a half-eaten bologna sandwich found at a murder scene to the teeth of the prime suspect. In a more recent case, Hayne claimed the bullet wounds in a murder victim showed that 2 people held the gun when it was fired, not one. In the Mabry case, West used bite mark analysis to nab an innocent man for Mabry's murder. That man spent nearly a year in jail. But the Mabry story also shows that the victims in this scandal include not just the wrongly accused, but the families of the victims, the future victims of the actual perpetrators, public officials like Roseman, and even entire towns. Mississippi officials have thus far resisted calls for a thorough review of Hayne and West's work. In particular, the Mississippi Supreme Court has shown little concern over the possibility that Hayne and West may have put an untold number of innocents behind the razor wire at Parchman Penitentiary. Neither has Attorney General Jim Hood whose office continues to defend convictions, one primarily on the testimony of one or both of the men, have given on the witness stand. To concede there's a problem would implicate many state officials who used the two men during tenures as prosecutors. It would also open hundreds, perhaps thousands of cases to review. Yeah, it certainly would.
Fancy that, saying that he could tell by the bullet wound that the gun was being held by two people.
Yeah, I know.
Is that one of the most absurd things you've ever?
It sounds extremely absurd to me. Yes.
So I think next is that it? Yeah, Tucker Carrington.
Let's see where
at the top there. Sorry, Tucker Carrington.
Okay. Tucker Carrington, the director of the Mississippi Innocence Project, says he and his colleague Will McIntosh decided to pursue Mabry's killer themselves after they attempted to bring the case to the attention of the prosecutor in Humphreys County, and then to Hood's office, and received no response from either. When you take on a case and it reveals a glaring injustice like this, something that could easily be taken care of if someone would just give it some attention, you can't just turn a blind eye to that, Carrington says. In the end, I guess we saw this through because no one else would. The defensiveness and nonchalance of Mississippi officials over the possible wrongful conviction, imprisonment, and execution of innocent people is troubling enough. Neither Hayne nor Hood's office responded to an interview request. The Huffington Post was unable to reach West, but the Mabry case shows that the harm Hayne and West have done goes deeper. The same problems that allowed for the conviction of innocents have also left brutal crimes unsolved, leaving those affected to grieve and worry with little hope of closure. Good people live here. They deserve to feel safe, Roseman says. I took it personal. And there's another corresponding harm when the innocent are implicated. The guilty often go free. Indeed, Mabry's murderer went on to kill again.
Surprise, surprise. So there's a picture of Belzoni in Mississippi. Yeah?
Yeah.
Miss is Mississippi, isn't it?
Yeah. Right. Judy Mae Wilson last saw her daughter around 7 p.m. on Saturday, March 22nd, 1997. She had just cooked up some fish for the boys and said she had to go out for a while. Wilson says she said she'd be back in an hour or so. I never did see her again. Wilson has lived in Humphreys County all her life. The drive down historic Highway 61 from Memphis, Tennessee to her hometown of Isola slices through the sort of harsh, agrestic beauty for which the Mississippi Delta is known. There are scenes of crushing poverty, gooey marshes, and quiet, bucolic landscapes. The route south backtracks the great black migration of the middle of the 20th century, when Delta sharecroppers traveled upriver in pursuit of better lives in Detroit, Indianapolis, and Chicago. Like its neighbors, Humphreys County lost a good chunk of its population then. It still grows smaller with each census. Wilson and her husband, now deceased, spent most of their working lives in cotton fields. The two had 8 children, including Mabry, and led the typically hard scrabble lives of black farm workers in the civil rights era. Today, cotton has given way to a new business in the area, catfish, raising them, processing them, eating them, and celebrating them. 2/3 of America's farm-raised catfish are grown within an hour of Belzoni. It's home to the World Catfish Festival and the Miss Catfish Pageant. The Miss Catfish Pageant, I love it. Okay, I wonder how many people end up saying they got catfished by Miss Catfish. Point. At the moment, the downtown features a collection of ceramic flatheads painted in different getups: overalls, fur coats, top hats, for a catfish on parade. A down-home take on Chicago's popular Bulls on Parade public art exhibit. There's also hope that in the new Delta Blues Trail, will bring tourists down from the casinos in Tunica to explore the legacy of the music home of the area's troubled past.
So there we are.
Murder songs, right?
Yeah. There we go. There's a picture by Radley of Belzoni in Mississippi.
All right.
You're doing fine, by the way, dude.
All right.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
But the residents of the county, now about 70% black, still continue to struggle economically. All of Wilson's children have left the area and now live in Chicago with their families. She had hoped for better things for Mabry, too. She graduated from high school and had started college, but picked up a drug habit soon after. Kathy came up when things started to get better around here, Wilson says. We had spent a lot of years chopping cotton. But I was working as a maid in houses by then. My husband was driving tractors, Wilson says. But she didn't last long in college before she got into drugs. Wasn't long before she was back home. Mabry battled her crack addiction for the rest of her life. She had some periods of sobriety. She married and had 2 sons, but her struggle with addiction eventually dissolved the marriage and dashed any hope of going back to school. She fell into a series of abusive relationships, and she and her boys moved in with her mother in Isola, the tiny town of 900 people, about 10 miles south of Belzoni. The last of those abusive relationships was with James Earl Gates, who was 48 at the time of the murder. He was no good, Wilson says. Broke her arm once. They were in some kind of love, but he had a short temper. He would come in here into my home and take over like he was the man of the house. I'm just an old lady. Kathy was tiny. The boys were young. There wasn't much we could do about him. Wow.
Well,
and this guy didn't even get looked at?
Well, no, he did. He did.
Okay. Mabry didn't come home after making dinner for her boys that Saturday night in 1997. When she hadn't returned by late Sunday morning, Wilson began to worry. She knew about her daughter's drug problem, but Mabry had of late managed to handle her addiction while still taking care of her boys and working at the catfish plant. She wasn't one to disappear without a phone call. On Monday morning, Gates called Wilson to ask if she knew where Mabry was. He'd called Mabry several times over the weekend, he said, and she hadn't picked up. Until then, Wilson had worried, but just assumed her daughter had been with Gates. Now she was panicked. She called Roseman and asked him to look for Mabry in Belzoni. Roseman checked around. No one had seen her. At 5:30 the following morning, a truck driver named Junior Mitchell pulled his rig up to his house to fill up from the diesel pump in his front yard. Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Mitchell had moved out of the place several months earlier to live with his girlfriend, but still came by from time to time to get gas and check on his property. The house had been burglarized several times since he left, and on more than a few occasions, he had shooed away drug addicts he found squatting inside. The vacated building had become a gathering spot for them over the winter months. That morning, March 25th, Mitchell noticed that a wall panel under the carport had been kicked out. When he approached the door to investigate, he saw a trail of blood. He followed the trail inside and discovered Mabry's body.
So,
the murder set the entire community on edge. You might see someone getting shot after an argument or something, but even that is really rare, says Dim Pyle, and the mayor of Isola. Nobody had ever seen anything like this because of the closeness everybody had with Kathy's family. The whole town, both towns, well, we were all just devastated. The county coroner, Roseman, and John Allen Jones, who was the Humphreys County sheriff at the time, arrived at the crime scene about an hour after Mitchell found Mabry's body. Jones called the Mississippi Highway Patrol, who sent an investigator and 2 inspectors from the state crime lab. They began interviewing suspects that afternoon. Mabry's body was sent to Stephen Hayne for an autopsy, though he held no official state position and was never board certified in forensic pathology. Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Between the early 1990s and the late 2000s, Hayne performed 80 to 90% of the autopsies in Mississippi, according to his own testimony in trials and depositions. That amounted to an astonishing 1,500 to 1,800 autopsies per year. Yeah. The National Association of Medical Examiners recommends that a single doctor perform no more than 250 autopsies per year. The organization refuses to certify any lab where an individual doctor performs more than 325 per year. Wow.
Yeah.
They'll shut down a lab for one doctor.
Oh, you read the rest of this paragraph.
Yeah. Hayne's workload could result in some odd autopsy reports, according to a complaint filed by the Mississippi Innocence Project. In one case, Hayne included in his report the weight of a man's spleen and made comments about its appearance. The problem, the man's spleen had been removed 4 years before he had died in an autopsy on a drowned infant. Hayne noted the weight of each of the child's kidneys, even though one of them had been previously removed.
Yeah.
Yeah. In another murder case, Hayne noted in his report that he had removed and examined the decedent's ovaries and uterus. The victim was a man. Brother.
It just beggars belief, doesn't it, eh?
Yeah. I'd say those are some startling inconsistencies, definitely. Mississippi autopsy system had been long loaded with bad incentives. Because prosecutors and elected coroners assigned autopsies on a case-by-case basis, doctors had a strong incentive to tell them what they wanted to hear so that they could benefit from future referrals. Sometimes critics say pleasing prosecutors meant providing them with findings that would lead to convictions. Right, otherwise they won't want to call you back.
Exactly.
Other times, it might mean presenting conclusions that cleared a police officer or prison guard when a suspect or inmate died under suspicious circumstances. Of course.
Exactly.
Then they can switch sides and protect the state.
Yes.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yeah. Oh, I love it. Anyways, all right. The state has made some progress in recent years, requiring that anyone who performs an autopsy for prosecutors be board certified, and Mississippi now has a credentialed state medical examiner. But the damage from the old system is ongoing because all those dudes are still in jail fighting their wrongful convictions, or some of them anyway. It was a system almost designed for abuse. If it hadn't been for Hayne, the Innocence Project's Carrington says, it would have been someone else.
You know, I mean, he was just doing what a load of other people.
He was, telling the prosecutors what they wanted to hear, so they'd call him again. Exactly. Any other fool, any number of fools could have stepped into that role.
Like the Michael Wests of this world.
Right. Okay. Hayne.
Yep.
He performed most of the autopsies not in the state of art crime lab in Jackson, but in the basement of a funeral home owned by longtime Rankin County coroner Jimmy Roberts. One former state official who had visited Hayne's operation on several occasions likened it to a sausage factory. Another said that in 2006 he watched Hayne and his assistants eat pork sandwiches and smoke cigars while cutting up multiple bodies at once. For much of his career, he held 2 full-time jobs during the day, so he did most of his autopsies at night, giving his practice a sort of a macabre mystique. Sort of,
yeah.
Oh, Lord. This guy's something else, man. One person often present at those all-night autopsy sessions was Michael West, a dentist in
Hattiesburg.
Hattiesburg,
yeah.
West often assisted with Hayne's autopsies and sometimes videotaped them. The two men also wrote articles together, and by the early 1990s, West had established a reputation as either an ingenious forensic specialist far ahead of his time or a charlatan, depending on whom you asked.
There's classic lines like this all the way through this article, honestly.
The police investigating Mabry's murder rounded up about half a dozen men who'd been in or near the vacant house around the time of her death and held them for questioning. Roseman and Jones initially focused on a man named Douglas Myers, an addict who'd been in the house and had a fresh scratch on his face the afternoon of the investigation. Now, that is interesting.
Yeah.
He couldn't give us a good answer for that scratch, Roseman says, but the state officials seemed interested in James Earl Gates, especially after learning that he had beaten Mabry before. Now that's interesting.
Yeah. This looks like the guy out of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, doesn't he? But this is Roseman. But anyway, there you go. Despite the history of abuse.
Despite the history of abuse between Gates and Mabry, Roseman never liked Gates for the murder. If she had been choked or had hit her head, if she'd been dumped out in a field somewhere, I'd say, okay, that makes sense. I could see that on Gates, right? Trying to take suspicion away from him and not, as they say, shit where you eat. You know what I mean? And that was his place. So he wouldn't hide her there. I get his reasoning, and it's good reasoning. He would hide her somewhere else if it was him. Maybe he'd lost his temper again. Maybe he got too rough with her, Roseman says. But when a man who loves a woman, when he's sleeping with that same woman, he doesn't do her body like that. A mean man will hit a woman he loves, but he won't cut up her face. You don't see that. And yeah, I basically agree with that. But I agree. If it had been Gates, he would have hid the body far away from a residence that could be tied to him.
Sure.
Roseman also says Gates wasn't defensive about Mabry's death. In fact, he seemed crushed. He showed real strong emotion when he heard that she had been killed. Roseman says he didn't try to give us an alibi. We had to ask him where he was. I don't think he even considered the possibility that he could have been a suspect. He'd soon become the only suspect. During the autopsy, Hain claimed to have found bite marks on Mabry's body. As he had done in numerous other cases, Hain then called in West, who claimed to have pioneered a new way for identifying bite marks in human skin, then matching them to one person to the exclusion of anyone else. He called it the West phenomenon. Yeah, the phenomenon.
I love that word. I love the way you Americans pronounce it as well. But I tell you, you mentioned the word root, but I always thought Americans called it route.
Both, say both. We can actually go either way.
Oh no! I just wondered if maybe too much speaking to Scots people has changed your vocabulary. But
no.
Okay.
I pretty much I hear it either way here in America. Just depends on the person and how they're whatever their particular mindset at the time is kind of determines.
Yeah.
But yeah, it goes both ways. All right. So West claimed that only he could perform this method of analysis, which involved yellow goggles and an ultraviolet light. He said, "Just so much smoke and mirrors." Holy God!
Here's the next line.
Okay, he said his method couldn't be tested by anyone else. It couldn't be photographed or recorded on video to be scrutinized by other forensic specialists. At various points in the 1990s, West and the prosecutors who used him in their cases compared his bite mark genius to musician Isaac Perlman.
I don't know.
Galileo and Jesus Christ.
I mean, I didn't know that either of those played any instruments, but there you go.
Right, I know, right?
Oh no, I see. Right, it's Isaac Perlman is the musician. Galileo was obviously a famous person, and Jesus Christ is who he is. So anyway, yeah.
Right.
Okay, I get it.
So the National Academy of Sciences, however, does not consider bite mark analysis to be credible as evidence in a trial. And even within the already questionable field of bite mark analysis, concerns about West were already mounting. On March 27th of 1997, West confirmed that Hain had found what Hain had found were indeed bite marks. He took photos of them, then drove to Belzoni to make plaster molds of the suspect's teeth. Using only the plaster molds and the photos of the bite marks he'd brought with him, West excluded all of the men then in custody. For dramatic effect, he used the same line each time. Sheriff, this is not your man. The police then escorted West to the home of James Earl Gates, who also allowed West to make an impression of his teeth. West then compared Gates' mold to the photos. In his report, Jones wrote that West next pointed out to me the similarities between the bite marks and impressions. He informed me that this was a possible suspect. West then drove back to the morgue to compare the mold of Gates' teeth directly to the marks on Mabry's body. At 12:45 a.m., West called Jones. "This is your man," West said. On April 1st, 1997, James Earl Gates was arrested for the rape and murder of Kathy Mabry. He was booked at the Humphreys County Jail. Mississippi's slow motion disaster. How much is left in this article?
A fair bit, yeah.
Yeah.
We can do it in two halves if you want.
We might need to.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll see.
Because you're going to run out of Dr. Pepper.
That's not my concern. Sharon's live is coming up pretty soon.
We're just the hors d'oeuvres for Sharon, though. You see that? We're just the warm-up act.
Yeah. By 1997, Mississippi officials should have known that West was less than credible. He had already been the subject of unflattering profiles in the ABA Journal and the National Law Journal. He had also been suspended by the American Board of Forensic Odontologists for testifying beyond his expertise, including in the infamous bologna sandwich case.
Yeah.
In that case, the defendant was convicted, but the conviction was later overturned when West admitted to disposing of the sandwich after studying it. He said that he had thrown the evidence away because since no other forensic analysis was qualified to replicate his methods, the sandwich was no longer necessary.
I bet you he ate it. I bet he ate it.
He probably did. He probably did. I wouldn't surprise me one bit.
This is
while he was pounding a high life.
Yeah, this is destruction of evidence, just like in Manitowoc, eh?
Yeah. Yet West remained a favorite in Mississippi courtrooms and among law enforcement officials and prosecutors. In 1999, the Mississippi Supreme Court considered the appeal of Kennedy Brewer, who was on death row. Well, he was from the Innocence Files, we all remember, right? Who was on death row for the rape and murder of a 3-year-old Christine Jackson 6 years earlier. As in the Mabry case, Hain had claimed to find bite marks on the victim's body. He again called in West, who again matched the marks to the dentition of the chief suspect, in this case Brewer, the boyfriend of the girl's mother. In light of the continuing revelations about West, Brewer's attorneys asked the court to overturn the conviction and death sentence and to suppress West's testimony. In 1997, the court refused. A majority of the justices still believed West possessed the knowledge, skill, experience, training, and education necessary to qualify as an expert in forensic odontology. But what about the fact that he testifies beyond his expertise?
Exactly.
I don't want an odontologist testifying as a handwriting expert, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, fine. West can sound convincing to juries and to those without scientific training. I should have gone with my instincts about Gates, Roseman says. But when West showed me the video where he matched the marks, he made a good case. I just thought this is what a man does every day. All these judges and crime labs folks trust him. He sounds scientific. Who am I to say he's wrong?
Well, I would say fair enough. If everybody else is this is the problem, isn't it? Now I don't know why we've got a picture of Dr. Michael West and there's no picture there, but presumably it was decided that we weren't allowed to show a picture of Michael West.
Yeah, could be. In fact, in Mabry's case, West may have been wrong. May not have been wrong, at least about the bite marks. Mabry's previous paramours told Roseman that she enjoyed rough sex, including biting. Gates himself admitted to having bitten his girlfriend a few weeks before she died. That, of course, doesn't validate West's methods. Gates may have bitten Mabry, but there was no evidence he bit her on the day she died. Indeed, a competent analyst should have recognized that the marks were not weeks old.
Were weeks old.
The
marks were weeks old. Yeah.
And old bite marks from her boyfriend certainly weren't evidence that he killed her. In October of 1997, Gates' attorney asked Humphreys County Circuit Court Judge Janie Lewis to suppress West's testimony, citing the mounting questions about West's credibility and about bite mark evidence in general. Lewis ruled that there was no reason to doubt West's credibility. Oh, goodness. This is why we have so much problem in our justice system, because, geez.
Yeah.
But he did give Gates funding to hire his own expert to examine the alleged bite marks. A few months later, District Attorney James Powell sent the scrapings taken from under Mabry's fingernails to the state crime lab in Jackson for DNA testing. At that time, DNA testing was more primitive. A test could exclude someone as a suspect, but couldn't yet match a suspect to biological evidence the way the technology can today. The test came back a few weeks later. Kathy Mabry had scratched someone in a frantic fight to save her life, but it wasn't James Earl Gates. In fact, it wasn't any of the men the police had rounded up as suspects. Not even Douglas Miles, the man with the scratch on his cheek. Mm-hmm. On January 21st of 1998, Powell dismissed the murder charge against Gates. It was now 10 months after his crime. Memories had faded. Some witnesses had left town, and Roseman and Jones were back to square one. Judy Mae Wilson was crushed when she heard the news. Her daughter's killer was still on the loose, and with so much time now passed, it seemed unlikely he'd ever be found. But she was also terrified. Gates may not have murdered Mabry, but he had shown to be a violent man. He was now free, likely angry, and almost certainly knew that Wilson had told the police he beat her daughter, which likely made him a suspect in the first place. Roseman and Jones told Gates he wasn't to go anywhere near Wilson, her home, or Mabry's boys without Wilson's permission. We didn't see him much after that, Wilson says, but those first few weeks, we were awful scared. In the years that followed, Hain and West continued to apply their questionable brand of forensic analysis to other cases. At the same time, their work also began to attract more scrutiny, through mostly from outside of the state. In 2001, Arizona defense attorney Christopher Plourde tricked West into matching some crime scene photos of a bite mark left on a murder victim's breast to a dental mold taken from the mouth of the attorney's own private investigator, who had nothing to do with the crime. After accepting a retainer fee, West confidently sent back a 30-minute video in which he methodically explained how the bite marks in the photo could only have come from the attorney's suspect.
That was the sting.
Because it was his investigator and had nothing to do with it. Yeah. So yes, it was the best evidence to date that West is a charlatan, and yet Mississippi prosecutors still defended convictions won on West's testimony, and Mississippi judges still upheld them.
I can't find these videos; they're not there. So
yeah. In 2002, Kennedy Brewer's attorneys were finally able to test the DNA of the semen found in young Christine Jackson's body. The test showed that the DNA did not belong to Brewer, but rather than release Brewer and declare him innocent, West and District Attorney Forrest Allgood insisted that while someone else may have raped the little girl, West's analysis clearly showed that Brewer had bitten her. Okay.
Yeah.
They posted that.
Posited. Yeah.
Posited that perhaps Brewer had held the girl down and bitten her while someone else raped her. Brewer's conviction was overturned, but Allgood promised to try him again. So Brewer remained in prison. Brewer's attorneys next tried to get the DNA profile of Christine Jackson's killer uploaded to the state and national databases to see if they could find a match. Allgood fought them every step of the way.
Why would you want to do that?
Why would you want to do that? Oh, jeez. Allgood did not respond to a request for comment. Yeah, that's just bull. I know who they're talking about too. I remember that guy Allgood from the Innocent Files. That dude was so full of himself, and felt like he was like righteous. He was, oh, yeah, that dude had issues. Anyway.
Well, a bit like West, they're so full of themselves. They are so sort of self-convinced.
Yeah, definitely.
And you get the impression that they've repeated the same lie over and over and over again. That lie to them becomes the truth, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Okay, so in 2004, Tyler Edmonds was convicted of conspiring with his sister to kill her husband. Edmonds was 13 at the time. The prosecution's theory was that Edmonds and his sister had simultaneously held and fired a gun at the victim while he slept. Hain testified that he could tell by the bullet wounds in the body that there were two hands on the gun that created them.
I mean,
I
don't understand how people would be taken in by that.
I don't. Yeah, like I said, the CSI effect. But I don't know. Anyway. But the assertion was too preposterous for the Mississippi Supreme Court in 2007. The court overturned the verdict, but also went out of its way to explain that the ruling pertained only to the Edmonds case. The majority made clear that it wasn't questioning Hain's credentials or credibility in other cases. Oh, brother.
Yep.
You're noticing it right there and still co-signing his crap. Oh, my God. You got to be kidding me. Anyways, all right. In the following February, the Innocence Project of New York and Mississippi, now representing Kennedy Brewer, were finally permitted to search the DNA databases for a match to the semen found in Christine Jackson. The search not only turned up a match, it also found a match to the rape and murder of another little girl in the same county 2 years before Jackson was killed. Hain and West's testimony had already helped Allgood convict another innocent man, Levon Brooks, for that crime.
Interesting, isn't it? This guy Radley is obviously well onto these guys, isn't it? Because those were the first two cases highlighted in the Innocence Files.
Right, absolutely.
Yep.
The DNA in both cases matched that of the 51-year-old Albert Johnson. Johnson was arrested and convicted for both murders. In both cases, Hain claimed to have found bite marks other doctors had missed and called in West, who matched the alleged bites to the dental molds of the prosecutor's main suspect, who in both cases happened to be the mother's boyfriend. Johnson was initially a suspect in both cases. Just like they went for, sorry, what was his name?
The
original guy.
Somebody Gates.
Gates, yeah.
Yes.
When they went after Gates. Let's see. Had Hain and West not been so eager to affirm the hunches of law enforcement, Christine Jackson could well be alive today. Brewer and Brooks were immediately released, having served more than 30 years in prison between them. Since then, the evidence against Hain and West has continued to pile up. In 2009, I reported on the case of Jimmy Duncan, who was convicted in Louisiana in 1993 of sexually abusing and murdering the daughter of his girlfriend. That case produced video of West performing one of his notorious bite mark examinations. The video shows him repeatedly jamming a plaster mold he'd made of the suspect's teeth into the skin of the alleged victim, 18-month-old Haley Olivo.
Yep.
Okay. Jimmy Duncan, who was convicted, who was still convicted and is still on death row in Louisiana. So I'm thinking, is that going to be the good place to cut it off?
Yeah, why not? Because
Yeah,
this is interesting stuff. As I say, it all leads to this brilliant article about the expert witness goes nuts, when we finally get to meet Chris Fabricant and Dr. Michael West talking together in depositions.
Right. Okay.
So that's going to be well worth looking forward to.
All right.
So anyway, I would like to thank you.
We'll do that. We'll do that later. Except we'll do part 2 on my channel.
Yeah, absolutely.
After Sharon and stuff, a little later on.
You want to do that later on tonight? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, dokie.
All right, dude.
Lovely. Okay, dokie.
All right, everybody, head over to go see Sharon. Well, you got about 20 minutes or so. Yeah.
You got time to recharge your glasses.
Yeah. Fill up your glass. Take a potty break or whatever. So anyway.
I've been taking it very steady recently, I must admit. I mean, this is mainly evaporation rather than consumption.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, that'd be great. So I don't know how long Sharon's on for, but we might be catching you with I don't know, a couple of hours, 2.5 hours time, something like that.
Yeah, that sounds about right, I would think.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. We'll tell Sharon to go quick. No, we won't.
Well, I'm gonna let Sharon have fun.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's gonna be interesting. So.
Yep.
Anyway, I'll find out from Sharon how long she thinks she's gonna go, and then I'll schedule it for like a half hour beyond that.
Yeah.
So.
Good idea.
All right. So.
Catch you later. Everybody.
Been fun.
Cheers.
That's bye for me.
And it's goodbye from him. Till later. Cheerio.
If you haven't already, please hit subscribe.
Yes, to his channel.
All right. See you, folks.
What I'm going to do is